Hello, I'm Harry from Antler Studios, and today I'm going to be showing you a YouTube tutorial on how to build a procedural foliage generator in Unreal. I'm using version 4.23, and before you get started, you're going to need to grab a couple of different meshes that you want to be whatever you're generating. It's worth noting that it doesn't have to be grass and trees, but grass and trees are obviously the most common type of thing you're going to want to be generating in this manner. Basically, the tool we're going to be building is going to take a bunch of parameters for meshes, and then when we click this box here, it's going to run a function that will automatically generate trees and grass for us. We can do this in the editor, but then I'll show you how to move it over to a runtime function as well at the end if you'd rather have it happening when you press play. Okay. Right, so the first thing we're going to be doing is creating a new blueprint. So we move our mouse over to the Content Explorer, right click, and click Blueprint class. This class is going to inherit from actor because it's just going to be something we're placing out in the world, and I'm going to call it BP underscore foliage spawner. I'm going to open it up, and first thing I'm going to add to it is a box collider. This box collider isn't strictly necessary for what we're doing, but it's very useful for visualizing where we're going to put the foliage, so it's good to have it. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a variable called box extents. And this is a vector. I'm going to give it a default value, just 100 by 100 by 100, and then in my construction script, I'm going to grab the box. I'm going to set box extent equal box extents. The reason I'm doing this is so that I can modify the box extents in the same places where I'm going to be modifying everything else. It's not absolutely essential that you do this. You can do this manually by clicking on the box component and changing the extents here. But if I make this vector public, compile and save, I can then, on any foliage spawner that I have in the level, modify the box extents at the actor level instead of having to go into the box and doing them that way. The next thing I'm going to do is, inside my foliage spawner, declare a bunch of different variables that we're going to need in order to do this. So the first thing I'm going to declare, a Boolean called run build. We're basically going to use this to limit the amount of times that this function will run, because if we don't limit it in this way, every time we move the actor or change even the slightest part of it, the construction script is going to run, and it's going to constantly try and delete and respawn all the foliage, and that's going to be quite expensive. So we're going to use a Boolean basically just to limit when the spawning happens. So once we've got that, we're going to hold Control and drag out to just do a get, and then hold B and left click to do a branch. Basically, we're going to just, and then everything we write is going to basically happen after this. And then once we've done it, we'll set this back to false. So in the construction script, when we click run build, everything will build. Run build will be set to false, and then it will stop. The next thing we're going to declare is our meshes. So we're going to use a map for this. So declare your variable, call it meshes, look for static mesh, and we're going to go object reference, and then we're going to change this to a map, which is the fourth one down here. The reason we're using a map is because it's a really useful way of just having pairs of values. So we're going to have, so if I make this public, compile, and go back to my foliage spawner, I can see under meshes, if I add an element, I can give it a mesh, and then I can also give it an integer, and the integer is going to be how many of the mesh that we're going to spawn. The next thing I need some local variables in my construction script. So this one's just going to be an integer. It's going to be in a zone. This one's going to be called spawned number. This is a variable we're going to increment every time we add an instance of the thing we're going to spawn. And we're going to put another integer in here as well called attempts, because the way this is set up, it is possible that we might enter an infinite loop. So we're going to restrict the amount of temps that we try and spawn stuff with that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our meshes and we're going to ask for the keys. That's going to give us all the keys as an array. So in this instance, the keys will obviously be an array of static mesh objects. And we're going to basically take the array and go for each. So this will iterate through every element of the array that we've just put out. So outputting an array of static meshes, and now we're going to iterate through them. What we need to do next is grab our mesh map again, and we're going to do find. And so we're going to use the static mesh object that we've got as a key, and that will make sure that we have the right pair of static mesh object and integer of how many we want to spawn. We need to check that that actually works, so we're just going to put a branch in there for safety. And then once we know what we're after, the thing we're going to do is we're going to add hierarchical instance static mesh component. Very long word, but what it basically is several copies of the same static mesh. It's what Unreal uses to generate foliage on landscapes. If you ever use the foliage tool there, it needs a mesh, and then it also needs a transform for the component itself, because we're adding it in the construction script. The component itself doesn't need to go anywhere else, so we can just do get actor transform as the relative transform for the component. Once we've done that, we need to set the mesh that it's going to use. So it's going to be set static mesh, and the mesh it's going to take is the current one that we're iterating through. So I'm just going to hook that up there like that. Then we want to start basically checking if we've got valid space in the level, and then if we do, we're gonna spawn a bit of foliage there. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to take the box that we've created. We're going to create an array of random points at the top of this box, line trace down, and then wherever it hits something, we'll spawn an instance of our hierarchical instance static mesh there. Before we actually start line tracing, we're going to want to figure out the conditions under which we do that. That's basically where our local variables are going to come in. So we're going to have a while loop, and a while loop takes a Boolean as an argument and will continue running as long as that Boolean evaluates to true. There are two things that we want to check. We want to check that the number of meshes that we've already spawned is less than the amount that we said we wanted to spawn, and we also want to check that we've still got some attempts left as well. So we're going to start by we're going to grab spawned number, and we're going to say as long as that is less than this value here. So this value here is the amount that we want to spawn stored in our map. I'm going to double click on this line here to create a reroute node, and I'm just going to position it somewhere just a bit nicer. So that's one condition that needs to be true in order for us to keep running our script, but we also want to check that we've got some attempts left. So I'm going to get attempts, and I'm going to say as long as attempts are, and I'm going to pick an arbitrary value, but I'm going to say that attempts are basically, we're allowed to have twice as many attempts as we want to spawn. So I take this, times it by 2, plug that in there. So I've got two evaluatory Boolean conditions here. One saying, is the number I've spawned less than the number I want to spawn? And the other one is saying, is the amount of attempts I've made at spawning less than twice the amount of the number that I want to spawn? So those are my two conditions that both need to be true in order for the code to run. So I'm going to use an and bool node. I'm going to hook them both up to here and then plug that into there. So what this basically means is that if any of these conditions becomes false, then we'll stop spawning foliage, which obviously we need to do in order to avoid infinite loops. So I said that the way that we're going to ascertain where we want to spawn our foliage is by picking a random point across the top of the box component that we've added here. And I'm going to write a macro in order to help us do that, because we don't want this script to get too big. I'm going to go across the macros and click plus. I'm just going to call this get trace params. The reason I'm calling it trace params is because the thing that I'm going to output from this macro is a pair of vectors. It's going to be the start and end point of my line trace. So if I click on anywhere in the macro, click plus by outputs, I'm going to call one of them start, and it's a vector, and then I'm going to call the other one end. So those are the two things that I'm going to output from this macro, and then I'm going to plug them into a line trace, and that's going to help me decide where all my foliage is going. So to get a random point across the top of the box, I'm going to get the box first of all, and I'm going to do relative location. And the node that I'm going to be using here is going to be random point in bounding box, and this takes an origin and a box extent. Now we've already set the box extent of the box to equal this variable here, so we know that that one's pretty easy. I'm going to plug that one in, and I'm also going to plug this into the origin here, and this is going to give me a random point inside the box no matter what size it is, but it's not good enough at the minute. We need a random point on the top of the box. So in order to do that, I'm going to extract the XY value from this. I'm going to right click on it and do split struct pin. And then I'm going to click over here, make vector. So I'm going to take the X and Y value of the random point that I've just made, but I need to get the top of the box as the Z value regardless of what the X and Y is. So I'm just going to copy this quickly. That's left drag and select, and then Control C, Control V. I'm going to right click on this and split this one as well. So this is the relative transform of the box component itself. So I know it's always basically sat. I know it's sat in the middle of the actor. So if I get its Z value and add to that half of the box extent, then that's going to give me the top of the box. So box extent, right click, split struct pin. I'm going to get the Z and divide it by 2. So it's float over float. And then I'm going to add that to its existing Z position. And then this will always give me a Z value that's the top of the box. So if I plug that back into here, then I've now got a random point across the top of the box. So this random point at the top of the box is still all in relative terms, so relative to the actor itself. When I do a line trace, it takes a world space position, so I need to change this value from a relative vector to a world space vector, and I can do that just by getting the actor's location, and adding that to this relative point along the top of the box. And now that will give me a random point on the box actually in world space, and that's where I'm going to start my line trace. Where I'm going to end my line trace is I'm basically going straight down. So I'm going to grab my box extent. I'm going to split the struct pin by right clicking. And I'm just going to make a new vector that it's just 0, 0, but then the Z value of the box extent, and I'm going to subtract that from this vector that I've made. In fact, I can subtract it from this one. So this is going to give me the point across the top of the box minus the Z extent of the box, so it'll then give me a point on the bottom. I'm going to plug that into end, and now I've got my start and end positions for my line trace. Let's go back to the construction script, and we're going to say, so during our while loop, we're going to call line trace by channel. The channel we're going to trace is visibility. I'm going to drag out from my macro here, and it should just put it out there for me, so I can plug start into start, and end into end. Before we carry on, I just want to check it's working. So I'm going to change the debug type to persistent. And yeah, got a trace, make sure it's got a trace color and a hit color. I'm going to compile and save. Go back to my foliage spawner object. And so I'm going to make sure I can see the toolbar. And I'm going to change the perspective to top, because that's a really handy way of making sure this is going to look up. I'm going to open my, well, actually I can do it here. So I'm going to modify my box extents until it's basically just about in the middle of everything. In fact, I don't need to get it perfect right now, but yeah, this will do. Once I've got it roughly in the right spot, change it back to perspective. I'm going to then, with my foliage spawner selected, open the meshes map and make sure there's something in here, because if there isn't, nothing's going to run. I'm just going to give it some grass, and let's just say 5,000 for now. Hopefully when I run build, right, so I've got a load of debug lines that I've printed out, probably too many, but you can see them here all printing out for duration. So let's undo that. So I'm actually going to just make some modifications before I ran that again, because that was pretty expensive and I don't want to blow up anyone's computer. So I need to make sure that run build actually gets set back to false, because that wasn't happening just then. So I'm going to drag out and click set, and I'm going to set that to false. And then I'm also going to make sure that every time I do one of these line traces, that my number of attempts increments. So I'm going to drag out from that and click ++, and I'm looking for increment int. This will make sure that I don't actually make a number of attempts that is more than what I said, because I think that's just what happened on that screen a minute ago. So let's compile and save that. I'm going to delete this. Okay, that's not going to work. So I'm going to quickly open up my map again so I can get rid of these debug lines. Save it. And the other thing I'm going to do actually is back in the foliage spawner, I'm going to change the draw type to duration, so that they're only there for a few seconds, say 3 seconds. So go back to content. I've got to hook this bad boy back up again. All I'm trying to do here at this point is just properly demonstrate where the foliage is going to be spawned. So that looks about right. Raise it up a little bit as well. Let's make sure the extents hit the floor. Let's go through it a bit. Okay. So make sure it's got a mesh. Make sure it's got some values. Hit run build. Okay, that was better. So you'll notice it didn't run an infinite amount of times there. It ran specifically 5,000 times. And after I click run build, it also goes back to false. You'll notice wherever those little squares are that appear when I click run build, that's a hit. So that would be a point in world space where we spawn our foliage. Let's make this a bit longer so we can have a better look at what's happening here. So I'm going to move it. I'm just going to move it back to, yeah. So you can see the lines go green when we go through objects and we actually hit something. So this is the data that we're going to use to actually spawn our stuff. So back in the foliage spawner, we're going to ask if the hit was successful. So, and only then spawn our foliage. So once we've done that, we're going to grab the hierarchical instant static mesh component that we added. We're going to drag out from it all the way over here, and we're going to add instance in world space. So if this is true, add instance in world space. It needs a transform in order to do that. So we're going to drag out from our hit and start typing in break hit result. A hit is a struct full of all sorts of different information about what just happened in the trace. The thing we're most interested in at the minute is the position. So drag back from world transform, start typing make transform, and I'm going to plug the location of the hit into the location of variable of the make transform node. And then once that's done, I'm also going to make sure that my spawned number goes up. So hook that up. So yeah, so what we're doing is we're line tracing from the top of the box to the bottom. If we went through something, then we're going to increase our number of attempts regardless of whether we went through something. But if it did go through something, we're going to add an instance of our foliage at that location. So let's compile and save. Make sure that meshes has a value and has a number. Click run build, and we can see we're starting to get some foliage. So once these red dots go away, I'll set them in 10 seconds, right? Cool. So you can see that we're now spawning foliage across the box, but we've got a couple of things we want to sort out. One of them is if the box is already overlapping something, when we call the run build functions, it's going to spawn things like directly on top of the box. So we're going to get around that by just making sure that the box isn't overlapping any walls or anything like that. The other thing that you'll notice is that we're not adjusting the rotation of anything that we spawn to match the things that we spawn onto. That might be fine with trees, but as you can see with grass, it means that it's kind of just floating half out in the air. So let's get to work on fixing that. So I'll start with the rotation. One of the things we get back from hit is a normal of the thing we hit. But we drag out from that and we start typing rotation from X vector. That's going to convert the normal to a rotator for us. It's not perfect. We need to modify it slightly first. So we're going to do break rotator and then another node called make rotator. And we're going to keep the X and the Z the same. But for some reason, with grass I've got, we need to modify the pitch by 90 degrees. So I'm going to do float minus float. And yeah, it's going to be 90. Plug that back in and then plug in the return value for the rotation value, the transform of your instance. Compile and save, and then let's just check that works. So foliage, spawner, and build, and then hopefully, the grass is now properly lining up to the thing that it's stuck on. Awesome. The next thing we want to do is just fix up the size of that box. So I'm going to go back to a top-down perspective. I'm going to just make sure that it doesn't overlap anything. Yeah, that is fine. And then I'm also going to make sure I'm happy with the height. I think I am. I might want it a little bit lower, just so it doesn't get everything on the top. Yeah, cool. I'm going to check it's working by adding another element to my meshes. So I'm going to add the ferns. So I've got some ferns here. Let's make a bit more grass as well. So I'm going to do 15,000 instances of grass. That might be too many actually. Let's try 15,000. I'm going to do about 30 ferns. That looks better. And we're not touching the edges of our wall anymore either. Yeah, I think we want to go a bit higher. Yeah, let's go a bit higher actually. And let's also turn off our debugging now. Set that to none. Okay, last thing I want to do is add a couple of trees, and then we'll have a look at how this works. So add another element to meshes. I'm going to pick, let's do a couple of trees. So I'll do like 10 of you, 2 of you, click run build, and we've got no trees. Right, let's find out why that is. So you'll notice that we're not, it's only running for our first thing, and that's because we're never resetting spawn number or attempts after we've done the first thing. So these are going to evaluate to false, and then for every subsequent element of the mesh array that we iterate through, attempts and spawn number are already starting off where we left them. So we need to reset them once we've finished making them. So after completed, I'm going to drag out from attempts, hold Alt just to do a set. I'm going to do the same with spawn number as well. I'm going to hook them up. So basically what this is doing is, after we've finished spawning all our different instances of one given foliage type, we're going to reset these two values so we can reuse them again for the next foliage type. So compile, save, and then let's run again. Excellent. And now we've got some ferns and some other types of trees. Awesome. So press play. You'll notice that you can run around and it all works. The only thing about this is that it's currently, the run build function currently runs in the editor. So if we wanted to say use this blueprint in, say, a procedural level, we're going to need to modify when it all happens and to happen at runtime. If you're happy using the blueprint at this level to help you build levels, then that's fine. You can finish the tutorial here. If you want to know how to have all this stuff happening at runtime, we're going to need to move over a lot of the stuff we wrote into a separate function. So we can do that by clicking on functions, add function, and we can call this spawn foliage. We're then going to go into our construction script, and we're going to take everything from the construction script after the run build branch. We're going to Control X to cut, and then Control V to paste. Now this isn't going to work straight away. We're going to have to fix up some stuff because the local variables of spawn number and attempts don't exist in the context of this function. They only exist in the context of the construction script. So let's go back to my construction script first and delete those and delete attempts. So it just looks like that. Then I'm going to go back into my spawn foliage and I'm going to just delete anything that's broken for now, and then I'm going to replace them. So I'm going to add them again. So it was spawned, number, and attempts. Drag out, hold Control for a get. And then I want to increase attempts here, and then spawned number here. Right, compile to see if there's any more errors. Doesn't look like there are. So now we have this function migrated, this whole functionality moved over to a function that we can call whenever we like. So if I just do it on begin play. So hopefully what this means is you won't see anything in the editor, but if I press play, then I've got some foliage. Although it does it like I've got another issue here, so let's have a look at what that is. I've lost all my... Oh, we're not, same issue as before, we're not resetting attempts and spawn number after we've finished using them. So in here, and it's after our while loop. Press play, and voila. We are now spawning foliage at runtime. We've collapsed all the functionality into a single function, so that means we can call it whenever we like. We could call it when if we're building a procedural environment and we're, say, walking into a new area and the level's building in front of us, we can now call that function to spawn foliage on top of it. We can spawn the box, set the size of the box, and then run the spawn foliage function all within a single frame. Awesome. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. And if you enjoyed this tutorial, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe to Antler Studios. We're all very grateful. Thank you.